Welcome back to my ongoing discussion with my good friend, Zachary Feder, and his maps of consciousness for the last 2 weeks. It's been 2 weeks, right? This is our third episode. And the first week we talked about how trauma is so embedded in everyone that we don't really have a clear playing field to act on, I think, as far as developing compassionate, understanding relationships. The second level of that is that we don't know how to deal with our emotions. We don't know how to, we don't know how to understand what we're feeling as children. We're not taught that. And then we project this lack of understanding also onto relationships. So we have these two things going on in our ability to communicate with ourselves and, of course, the people that we're in relationship with in our environment, in our lives. So is that a fair synopsis, at least, of the first 2 weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a conversation that's happening right now. I think the thing that I've been obsessed by and why we're really connecting together and continuing this conversation is because we've got all these practitioners and we've got all these individuals addressing in really wonderful ways all these different elements, a lot of which you've mentioned, from what I call retrofitting adult psyches in healthy ways, which is kind of the refurbishment of the psychic house, at 30, at 40, at 50, and also building them anew and afresh with healthy materials from the ground up with young people. But what we still don't have is a synthesis, is a manual. I mean, dare I say it, this kind of monumentally ambitious concept of phenomenology. Like, why haven't we entered into the world? As I always quip, we have manuals for toasters. We have to spend, hours, hundreds of hours training with cars before we can get our license. But there's not a single mandatory training for being a parent, which is to say to be the custodian of an emerging psyche, let alone any kind of formalized way that we bring our psyches into a pit stop along, the endless marathon of life for a tune-up. Our psyches, both you and mine, like, these are classic cars. They wouldn't be worth anything on the open market, and it's like, when was the last time we brought our classic car in for an oil change or this or an upgrade? We don't even, it doesn't even enter the mind.
We don't basically have a manual for consciousness, how we work. We don't have an understanding of our own minds, and we really don't have a kind of formula for driving this car, this consciousness that we have. So right. That's what you're coming down to, right?
Yeah, and we're addressing it piecemeal, which, by the way, is great. It's actually the process of evolution. We have to do it in that way. But we're approaching a moment where we're going to synthesize something, and a grand map of some sort is going to emerge. And for some reason, my own mission plays a small part in that, perhaps.
Because it plays a big part of it, because I think you're giving something to people that we have not had, which is a map of consciousness. Like we said in the past, Freud laid out the very basic understanding, which was too simplistic, too limited by his own worldview, but a start. Nevertheless, it was a start. Freud didn't invent the unconscious, but he was able to identify it. So what are the maps? What are the roads to identification that you're seeing here?
Well, what could be exciting is to actually continue where we went along. What I really enjoyed about this conversation was your enthusiasm to kind of really drive me to say, all right, let's get down to it. You who have been through so much, Alan, you have just, you've covered the landscape in, multidimensional ways. And what I really appreciate about you calling me in and really challenging me is, like, enough with the bullshit. Don't give me symbols. Don't give me interpretation. Give me meaning, on the ground, step-by-step meaning, because there's too much out there that kind of floats in all these various nebulous ways that never really grounds us in something that we can say, this is true. And then if that's true, then what's the next thing that's true? And then slowly building that map in a way that is embodied and not just intellectual. I should also say that this is not an intellectual journey. The intellect is the scaffolding that kind of supports the cathedral to be built. But at the end, we actually want to remove the intellect. I'm not so interested in the intellect, but you need it to build the cathedral. Once the cathedral's there, scrap the scaffolding.
If we're not doing it in an intellectual way, what is the structure that it takes? Is it intuitive? How do you define it? If it's not, it's.
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's go. Let's pick up where we left.
Too far. For those who kind of followed us along this journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
In our last session, we ended with what would be page 1 of the manual.
Okay.
And I'm really kind of interested in that. And I take my lead, quite frankly, from the old texts that have been with us forever, or as for long as really, maybe with the exception of the cuneiform tablets, let's say, like the Bible, the Torah. These are really interesting texts. And I don't say that from a religious perspective. You remember our old friend.
Tablets are interesting too, but that's another thing. No,
they are fabulous. We can include them, but we add even more complexity if we go to that level.
I know. We'll start with our basic Western civilization.
Exactly. Thank you. And I'll also kind of nod my hat to our old friend Stan Tenen, who wrote, who really brought us so much about the Taurus, which is connected to the Torah, right? I mean, he did fabulous work and was forgotten. And I think at some point in the future, he will probably return as one of the great unrecognized geniuses. And one of the things that he taught me back in the day was, he said, if you look at the Torah, if you look at this very interesting manual, right, in the way that they did it then, and you look at the archetypal way in which this was presented, how did they do it? And what they did was, the first letter of the Torah was bet, house, structure, right? House. And he said what he did was, and he would know this better than I do, but I give you the kind of the back of the napkin sketch of it, is the entire meaning of it was contained in the first letter, and then it was reiterated in the first sentence, and then reiterated in the first paragraph, and then reiterated in the first story, and over and over and over again. And all that you had essentially was this deep, profound meaning that was reiterated at higher levels of complexity throughout the entire text. Now that for me just
wait, so bet, right? So I like that. So it's fractals. You're saying the bet. The first word is Bereshit, and that means in the beginning, and that was a bed, and that was a bet was a house, and it was a container.
So it's like what we need
itself is a container,
right? So what we're saying is, if I want to really help you in this life, the first thing that I need to give you is 4 walls and a roof.
Okay.
I need to give you 4 walls and a roof. That's it. And how we started last time, right, is if I was to say one thing to you on my deathbed, and I couldn't give you the whole manual, but I had to start with the most important thing, 4 walls and a roof, what would I give you? And what we started was the energetic heart and awareness. Right? What I would say is, for me, that's almost like as warriors in life, both men and women, that's your sword and your shield in a way. That's Father Sky, Mother Earth.
So foundation 1, you're saying, in order to overcome what I said in the beginning, the deep trauma and not being able to deal with our pain or emotional pain, is the heart and awareness. Is that what we said? The open heart, the feeling heart, and what was the other thing?
The energetic heart, which I will also qualify many people, and myself included, for many years of my life, which is why I discovered the energetic heart to be really on par with awareness itself. And when we talk about awareness itself, we're talking about the Buddha's great realization and all of those contemplative traditions. I mean, awareness itself is the great Father Sky for me, right? The pristine, cloudless sky.
Can you define awareness? Because that is so vague, if you don't mind.
Sure. And once again, right, we have to use the intellect to scaffold our understanding of this, but it is not about the intellect.
Well, we're talking about understanding, so let's try to understand it, but yeah, go ahead.
So right, to begin where we left off last time, the most essential thing, and nothing actually can be built after this point if these two things are not in some ways embodied. Because if they're not embodied, because they are energetic and they are transcendent, if they're not embodied and we begin to explore other dimensions of this manual from a not from a disembodied place or from a solely intellectual place, the whole thing will be skewed from the start.
Okay.
That has to be really clear. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, that's
And again,
very.
this is
That's,
whether we agree or do not agree with this. This is
what is that?
one
Sorry.
significant school of thought
What is
that is out
That's
there in the world today, to this very day.
Wait.
And then you get.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. I don't know where that came from. Okay, go ahead.
So once again, to kind of walk over these first two, let's say, letters of this manual, the first 2 pages of this manual, it's very simple, right? Everything begins with awareness. And we can feel awareness within ourselves by simply going through a simple exercise by saying, be aware of your left big toe.
Okay.
Be aware of your right elbow. Be aware of the tip of your nose, right?
Okay.
And if you kind of play with that for a while, you realize that awareness is its own miniature little system.
Right.
It has the ability to focus. It has an aperture, like a camera lens that can expand, let's say, to encompass your whole body right here, right now. It can be diffuse, or it can focus in on your right earlobe, right?
Okay.
So it has a system, and it also has an origin. It has a point of contact, and it has an origin. And the origin is not your left butt cheek. You know, it's not your chin. It seems to be somewhere behind your eyes. And we can go into more detail about that. But for our sake today, let's just say it's kind of, sometimes I will say, like, if you really feel into awareness, it seems to also, it's behind your eyes, but it actually can actually descend lower and seems
It's
to be in some ways
everywhere in the body, in a sense.
Yes, you're going to the PhD level of awareness here, and we're still starting with high school.
Okay.
You know, the minute you say that, you jump to E equals MC squared when we're just actually doing subtraction, addition, and multiplication. And we got to be so careful with that.
I understand what you're saying, but I'm also trying to just, awareness is here because we've been taught that, but I think it's okay to extend that awareness into every part of our body and maybe beyond our body, but that's the PhD level, the beyond the body. So, okay, let's start with basic awareness and the open heart. Those are the foundational stones.
It's like with awareness, we start with just the fact that it's a flashlight.
Okay.
Flashlight.
Okay. That's great. Okay, I'm with you. So let's move from here.
We need to be able to move it, and we be able to know that place, there's a place of peace that can be found, right, at the center of the bulb. And we want to get very, very comfortable, and we want to get very habituated, and we want to normalize the moving into the bulb. Okay. Because if we move into the bulb of the awareness, right, time can stop, our body can disappear, peace can descend, lots of wonderful emergent properties can take place.
What do you mean by the bulb? You mean there's the root and then there's the bulb? Is that what you're saying?
Of the flashlight. I'm
Oh, the bulb of the flashlight. So we have
a very simple,
you lost me.
It's a very simple topography of awareness.
Okay.
So you have the light that comes from awareness. It illuminates something at the farthest edges. And if you go back to its core, there's the bulb. There's the origin of the light of awareness. That's a simple topography. It's a simple geographical map.
That gets a little metaphysical, a little complex. I think, yes, we can go there, like you said, but let's just start with awareness and the open heart. I mean, make it simple. Yeah, and then we can move back into the topography. But I think let's just start with those basics and build from there. Just so I can keep it simple for me and people listening. So where do we go from there?
Well, we also connect to the energetic heart, right? And as we ended last time with, is this idea that you have a biological heart that beats, and you have an energetic heart in the center of your chest, about 4 or 5 inches to the right of your biological heart. It's really about 3.5 inches. And that's like a Geiger counter, right, of sensitivity.
Right.
And that's almost like your sword and your shield in life.
Well, as someone writes in the chat here, browerification, does breath, do the two meet in the breath? Is that, could you say that? That's what I'm getting.
Yeah, that's beautiful. The breath is, I mean, that's such an interesting question. And I don't want to get too lost in there, but we could have a whole element around the breath. The
Right.
breath is a tool, right, that gets us there. The breath is not something, we're not interested in residing in the breath. We're actually interested in using the breath to help us reside in awareness, in the energetic heart, and in other areas. So I would say that the breath is more a tool, but the breath is, yeah, it's extremely powerful. And I think that's actually a wonderful connector. Absolutely.
Okay, good. Okay, so we got
Gotcha.
those two elements.
So the first word of this whole thing is, if I can't tell you anything else, energetic heart and awareness. Then the second thing, if I'm allowed to tell you one more thing, and maybe that would be the last thing that I could tell you, what would I tell you?
I have no idea.
It would be hell is coming.
Okay, I'm not
Hell
sure
is
what
coming.
you mean.
The underworld is coming. Pain is coming, right?
Pain is coming to everyone. Have to be pain? Is there another way of saying that?
No, we want to be honest.
Okay, so what do you mean by pain is coming? So the child is born, they have their breath, they have their awareness, they have their energetic heart, and then boom, the world insults them.
Well, also to be clear, this is our instruction for retrofitting the psyche. This is not what we would say to the child, right? And I'm always going to qualify that there are two channels here. One is how we build a house from scratch healthily from the new, right, the new psyche, and then how we actually just do a refurbishment job of an existing psyche. We're doing the refurbishment job.
Okay.
So we absolutely do not say that to the child, or if we do it at a much later stage and in a much different way.
Okay.
But what I mean by that is, once again, right, we're going in the most essential order. The first thing is, if page 1, line 1, verse 1, letter 1, awareness and heart.
Okay.
Then number 2, difficult times are coming, right? This would be the descent into the underworld, the descent of the hero. This would be trauma. If that's the second thing, it's the most essential thing. And then what I would want to share with you is, what is the structure of trauma, right? What are you going to face in the underworld? I need to give you that map. So we would dive right into the underworld. We're not, and what I mean by that is diving into the anatomy of it. I want to tell you because that's coming.
What you have to tell me specifically what you mean when you say pain is like, what is the instances that generate that pain or difficulty?
So this would be, I'll give you some specific examples, and I would also say this would be, the Buddha's first realization, life is suffering. That's what he's doing. He's actually putting it first. He's saying realization 1, life is suffering. I'm actually saying it second. And I'm certainly not putting myself on the same category as the Buddha, but I give you the example.
Right.
And to answer your question very specifically, it's, you're going to experience emotional pain. You're going to be triggered by those you love. You're going to be triggered by your existential suffering. Pain is coming. It's coming this afternoon. It's coming tomorrow morning. It's coming tonight. It's coming with those you love. It's coming in relationship to your mission. It's coming in ongoing cascades, whether you like it or not, and whether you prepare for it or not. And the only thing we can do.
Why is it coming? Why is that coming, pain?
Because it seems that one of the hardwired ways that we are taught in this life, in this new reality, is by having ourselves broken open to deeper places and deeper ways. That seems to be part of the hardwired nature of life, is that suffering is the harbinger of various stages of enlightenment or awakening, or whatever you want to call it. It seems that suffering is part of that. So it's not that this is a bad thing. It's just that it's an inevitable thing. And to be honest, I don't know if there's any real validity to debate whether that's true or not, because if anyone's listening to us who's never experienced suffering or doesn't want to experience suffering, I mean, call me next week and let's, see if you change your mind, because it's just kind
Well,
of
I don't think there's anyone listening who hasn't experienced some kind of suffering. So, okay, that comes as a result of not having not having a
it comes.
understanding of ourselves or the.
Well, it comes, and the reason why I think it's so important to talk about it so upfront is the fact that it's our heroic journey.
It's the hero's journey.
We're supposed to embrace it.
Okay. Okay.
And so what I would do with this second part is we would say, all right, what is the underworld? Who am I going to meet? Who's down there? Right? The boatman Charon needs me to pay him a gold coin. I'm going to float across the river Styx. I'm going to see the ghosts of my past. This is the old Greek phenomenology that they presented to us, but we're a little more modern than that. What are we actually talking about? So we can go through that. And here's the key, right? The reason we go through that is because in stage 3, right, in page 3 of this whole process, then we actually start to explore it.
Okay, let's go through though the pain, can we? So we can dissect it, and then
Sure.
next page we'll do what? Explore and dismantle it, or?
Well, then we go on a little journey, and we could probably do this together, Ellen. You might enjoy it.
Okay.
We could go on a journey which shows us where some of our pain first begins in this lifetime in the family unit.
Is the whole idea of this to resolve pain, or that's nothing that we can even look for? I mean, that's always there.
Well, I definitely think we can change pain. I mean, absolutely. Are you kidding me? I mean, if you didn't, if you couldn't change pain and transform it through all these hours of meditation, no one would do it.
Okay.
I mean, we do get something out of that, I think. And, connecting to the energetic heart and metabolizing your traumas. I mean, this is absolutely all about identifying the minefield within us and all around us, learning to diffuse those bombs and walk our path, in a less encumbered way. I mean, that's the whole purpose. If we can't do that, then there's no point in doing it in the first place. It doesn't work.
Okay, then let's move forward. So pain results in the first way because the world is new. Is that it? We're not talking about the child. We're talking about our old way of being has not been one to meet the world's, unexpected sort of, encounters, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, so to talk to those of us who are refurbishing our psyches, right? That part of it.
Refurbishing with your map of consciousness, yes.
What all of us, myself included, what we all have, what we've all been born into, is that we have chunks of ourself from childhood, from adolescence, perhaps from past lives, that have been sheared off and thrown into darkness, right? Thrown into the unconscious. And all of these things have this bizarre property that they essentially get in the way of me being present in this moment. And they get in the way of me seeing you clearly. And they get in the way of me actually moving forward in my life in a way that's unencumbered by repetitions from the past. Are you still with me, Alan?
Okay, I'm back. Okay, let me see if we went offline. Oh no, we're still online, so that's good. So let's repeat that because there was that little glitch there.
Sure.
Repeat that last point about
Yes.
pain. We have pain because we haven't been able to understand the way to function in the world.
So anyone who's arriving, right, and meeting this map, this manual, who's basically over 30, I mean, let's be fair, and probably over 17,
Mhm.
although you have to work with youngsters in that way in a far different way. But anyone who's over 30, let's to make it simple, we have an entire collection of parts of us that have been sheared off by life, right? And they're actually not here. They've been pushed into the unconscious, but the key is that they exert influence, maladaptive influence on our present.
Wait. So like someone who would be like a drug addict resorting to drugs because they're in so much pain that they needed to escape from presence and awareness, or alcoholics, or anything that takes us away from the pain. They're not here in that sense.
Right. Maybe to put it amusingly, it's as if we all have, people who are not doing healing work on all these parts of themselves that have been sheared off, which is where we have to start because that's where we are right now in civilization. We're all playing whack-a-mole, right? Every single hole, there's a mole in there. And what we really need to do is actually bring the mole back into the fold and integrate it as part of ourselves. But if you don't have a healing orientation, then every time one of these wounds rise up, you whack it with alcohol, with drugs, with distractions, with whatever you can. And at that surface level, and I use some terminology, and here we're stepping into the anatomy of the underworld, right? This is the anatomy of the hero's journey, the most important element, which is what are you going to experience when it gets tough, right? Which is also part of how do we actually reintegrate all these parts of us that have been sheared off and that are essentially making us blind to this present moment, right?
Good.
And that first layer, I actually take the language from Richard Schwartz, who essentially founded Internal Family Systems. He's doing work at Harvard. I might as well take that language because I like the language. That first layer we call the manager. So he calls these the manager. So the manager is a very benign part of you. It's the surface layer of your trauma. And what the manager does, it basically very courteously and in a very sophisticated, unobtrusive way presents that there's no trauma to you. Why not? Because you're passionate about your work. The manager's like,
let me just understand that. So we're out in the world, something comes up or pattern, we react, but we don't allow ourselves to feel the pain. The manager says, no, you can't feel your pain because you have to be doing what you're doing, and covers it up or numbs it out or doesn't let you feel it in whatever way.
Right. Well, it gets even better than that, but you're right. You've already spoken to like several of the stages.
Okay.
The first stage is it's not even that aware. The first stage is more like, let's say something comes up, your mole comes up, right? That first layer is like, I'm really hungry right now. Let's go get a sandwich.
Okay,
that's the first layer of defense.
That
The first layer
doesn't seem like such a bad thing unless you
No,
want.
well, it's very sophisticated. You see how sophisticated the evasion is?
No, what are you invading if you're hungry and you want to get a sandwich?
Well, no. So the mole would be, let's say you walk in the street, someone comes up, they say something in a conversation to you, and it triggers a wound around something.
I see. The mole, are you talking about little creatures like moles that live in the ground? Is that what you're talking about? And they come up out of the ground, and that's our pain.
Yeah, and the first layer of defense, right? And the first layer of defense is very sophisticated. It's the most sophisticated layer of defense is, I'll tell you another one. I'm bored by this.
Okay.
This doesn't relate to me.
Isn't that has happened at times though, right?
Yes. That's why it's so sophisticated.
I think you have to specify the pain. Let's talk specifics. So instead of just a mole, what comes up? Like what's like,
Well, that's the whole thing. So how about this? I will give you the layers down to trauma. Okay, the whole
okay,
thing. And then we can go into it just so you can see how there are these concentric circles.
let's,
First
okay,
layer.
let me, wait, let me just, I just want to just reference them just in terms of my own stuff. Someone says something to me that triggers an old childhood wound,
Yeah.
and now give me the levels, okay?
So well, I'll give you the terms and then we can
Oh, okay,
describe
okay.
right? First layer would be just the manager. The manager is going to keep you intact. You're bored, you're hungry, you got some work to do, you got an email to write. Oh, what's that Facebook thing? The manager, very sophisticated first layer that just avoids, right, the thing.
Okay.
Second layer, you're actually a little bit triggered.
Right.
Right? And what's going to happen with there is you're going to have either projections or introjections. He's an asshole. He just said something stupid. She just said something stupid. Oh, she's really in my face today. Or, and we can go into the difference between introjections and projections to be like, oh, I'm so weak that I don't have the strength to handle this conversation. I'm always so busy. I'm always so this and da, da, da. So one way or another, those, suddenly that comes in. Right? Then you might have a conflict style. So how do you deal with that? The conflict style would be you retreat, you run, you shut down, you disassociate, or you attack.
Okay, that's something you laid out in some of the earlier documents. Conflict styles. Let's just let's be clear, because everyone has one of three of these you mentioned, right?
Yeah, I've done a lot of work with that. Everyone preferences one. When your conflict styles are unconscious and you've been conditioned into one or two, but usually it's one with a secondary that you rely on if the worst case scenario happens.
Right.
But what we really need is this is one major part of the manual that we all need to be taught how to engage in all the conflict styles, because there's a time and a place for each of them. This is another example of how we're so lopsided. So what are they? Fight, flight, freeze, and accommodation.
Those are the conflict styles.
Those are the major conflict styles.
So wait, if something comes up with me triggered, I could run away or challenge it or freeze, which I don't know what that means in terms of this.
It's you disassociate, you check out.
Oh, I disassociate, like saying, let's get something to eat. That's a conflict.
Or you check your phone.
Well, I do that anyway, but yes.
But that's why it's so clever, because sometimes you have to check your phone. That's what's so clever about a projection, because sometimes someone is definitely triggering your wounds or my wounds around father.
Right.
And that's our wound. But at the same time, that guy's an asshole.
Right.
That's why the projection is really, really clever, because it's entangled with truth.
Okay, so we have these conflict styles. We fight, call the person an asshole. We escape into somewhere. We freeze, or those three basic.
So let's contextualize it. No, I appreciate you doing that, because let's contextualize it. Let's keep remembering that we're entering the underworld. So the first, this is like
the underworld being the source for that trigger. Really, that's what we're trying to get to.
The wound. Which is standing in the way of our ability to be present, and to do our lives unencumbered.
Right. The wound.
And so first layer manager, second layer triggers, third layer conflict styles. After that, I kind of throw in sometimes Richard Schwartz's term when it really gets bad. I don't really like this term, but I'll use it because people understand it. Your firemen come in, and the fireman is, you're really being triggered. You're absolutely not prepared, and maybe it's not even an environment where you can actually go into that. So the fireman does everything they can to put out the fire as quickly as possible, despite the collateral damage that it might do.
Well, explain what that looks like. I mean, that's a great term, but what does that look like?
So let's say someone is you're sitting with a woman, let's say, and she starts to say, this is classic with a lot of the people I work with, right? She starts to say, you know, you did something the other day, right? And this really triggers a wound, let's say in the masculine, of the all-consuming mother, right? And you're a little bit, your manager steps in and starts to rationalize everything of like, oh, it's okay, listen, and you start to kind of tell it, don't worry, it's fine, and and why don't we make some food and I'll do this and it's all very sophisticated. But she's not taking it this time. She keeps kind of going at you. And at some point the trigger comes up, right? And then the projections and the interjections. She's being a bitch, she's being too needy, right? And also like, this is actually hurting me. Like, you're actually not respecting the fact that like I'm trying to hold up a boundary here, and like I have trouble holding up boundaries and all these things and blah blah blah, and all that starts to come up. Let's say, and let's say all of that may be partially true, but at the same time, what's also actually happening is we're entering into a place where we're totally disorganized. That's what a wound is. That's what a trauma is. It's a place where we are not developed. We are underdeveloped, and we don't know that in the moment.
So what are the firemen at this point? What do they? What?
So if that keeps happening, at some point the fireman will say, well, you need to get the fuck out of there. So you'll stand up and you'll slam the door on her and you'll leave.
Okay.
Or you'll scream.
So
you'll just shut down and just walk into the other room and you'll just disassociate and play a video game or go on the internet or have a drink.
So the firemen are the drastic means
exactly
that we need to take in order to not feel the wound, not to go deeper into the wound. Or
exactly.
Okay, but they're drastic means.
Exactly. It's the most drastic means. It's the most drastic evasion of confronting the trauma, which we should say is sometimes appropriate, because sometimes it's not going to be right to enter the trauma because it's not the correct environment to do so.
Yes.
So we don't vilify the firemen or any parts of these, all of these parts. It's like a fortress. It's important for us to be fortified. It's absolutely essential, but we just don't understand when to open the gates and when to close them. And what most of us are is over fortified, right? And under-resourced at the level of the trauma.
Is it good taking your map to say, oh, there's the manager, oh, the fireman, this is part of why we're discussing it, to notice those aspects of ourselves that come in to intercede? Or is it just doesn't matter because they're labels anyway?
No, it's essential to know each of these parts. Each of these parts, we're being invited into the wound, into the underworld, oftentimes multiple times a day. And imagine what the world would look like if that was known to us as teenagers, if that was actually part of our educational system, so that I met you on the street and we both, this was a mother tongue. This was not something we learned at 30 or 40 or 50. This was a mother tongue. It's just part of understanding, like, permaculture in your garden, like,
or how to speak English, or how to walk, or ride a bicycle.
It's like how to do your dishes. It's like if you come over to my house and I've got some dishes in the sink and we're talking, we're having a great time, and I say, hey, let's make something, and you say to me, oh yeah, let's make something together. That'd be fantastic. Let's make some pasta. Wait, the bowl is dirty in the sink. Let's clean it together. I'd be like, oh, you're fantastic, Alan. Let's wash these dishes together. And so you'd be like, okay, you wash, I'll dry. Boom. That's what is possible for us to meet if we understand this process and we understand our managers.
Taking away from the pasta idea, if we understood this, I would, if you said something, I would say, wow, you just touched a deep wound. I feel the pain from my childhood. And instead of sending in the fireman or the manager, I'm just going to be with that pain or that feeling, that wound.
Then, and because you've got so much experience in this, because you know it, you're taking us there. Underneath the fireman, we eventually meet the exile.
The exile, explain that.
So the exile is the part of us that was not allowed. The part of us that was not heard. The part of us that is terrified of being re-traumatized again. That part of us is the part that had our boundaries broken, let's say. The part of us that was not, whose voice was not given the time to say, wait, stop everything. What do you really need? And I'm going to give you that time to say, I'm going to shut up. What do you really need? And let's just sit there. And that's energetic. And then we start to talk to that part that has been sheared off.
Well, let me see if I can access that. So we have the fireman rushing in and saying, get out of here. I can't deal with that. But you're saying if we sit a little longer without getting the firemen, then we reach the exile part of ourselves. Is that what you're saying? Or do the
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. I'll just qualify it by saying if we can gain the trust in ourselves and in what is essentially sub-personalities within us all the way down. So if we can gain the trust of the managers, trust of the projections, the interjections, the triggers, trust in the conflict style, trust in the firemen, they open up some space for us so that we're not more.
I don't know what you mean by trust. Somebody says stop interrupting, but I don't know what you mean by trust. Can you tell me?
So this is why the Greeks were such geniuses in their own unconscious way, is that what we're talking about is Olympus, right? We're talking about you are the part of you that wants to connect to the exile is Promethean. It's Prometheus. And it's stepping into this world filled with warring factions. So gaining the trust is, first of all, having that higher perspective that understands, that is not going to fall into a place where it's warring. You try to war with your firemen, you'll lose. You try to tell your firemen they're idiots and you need to get to the exile, you'll lose. You try to belittle your managers, you'll lose. So gaining the trust is actually, it is a good question, Alan, because but once again, I will qualify, you're taking us to a real PhD level. But if we quadruple click into this,
okay,
gaining the trust means to understand all of these sub-personalities within us. And these sub-personalities are parts that have lockstep processes in place. So if you come in not gaining their trust, essentially you're Zeus against Kronos. Okay, you're like Zeus against Hera. If you're Promethean, and if we try to take it to another level, you're coming in as a higher self saying, you all have a place. I'm going to honor all your place, but I'm going to show you that you have nothing to fear from me.
Oh, I see.
Internal process.
So if I have a fireman or overreaction, it's not like saying, oh, you idiot to myself, why did you do that? It's honoring, okay, I have a reaction. So that's what you mean by trust. So, okay, I feel this, or I want to manage this, or I want to get some food because I don't want to deal with that. If we recognize that those things are coming up in us and allow it without judging ourselves, then we can drop below that even, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I'll quote Richard Schwartz again by saying, he quips all the time, we all have multiple personality disorder. We all do.
What's the name of his book that you like so much?
Well, it's he works a lot with parts and he does a really great job and I appreciate it. It's internal family systems. It's one of the top modalities that's being used today with the mind, and he does bring in the higher self. And I think I would take a little bit further with that, but what he does is fabulous and is very useful for a lot of different people.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go to the exile. Once we honor these subparts and honor our reaction, then what is the exile again? Can you restate the psychology of the exile?
So the exile is the most painful part. It's the part we don't actually want to confront. It's the part of us that was broken in adolescence, in childhood, in a past life. It's the part of us that was not seen or understood by mom, by dad. It's the part of us that was not loved. It's the part of us that's not enough. That really is the holy of holies and the core. And we have multiple of them within us. We are an entire fractal, multidimensional minefield that could be like a healthy oil field in a way.
We have minefields of exiles living within us. And but I just want to say, if we didn't have a little bit of a healthy understanding of that, or the ability to sense the pain, that would degenerate into a total personality disorder.
Exactly. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. We see people all the time that when the entire system collapses if there are too many of these. And it overburdens the entire individual.
Right. And
Yeah.
they have no sense of self. So everything is what you said in the beginning becomes a reactive, unconscious defense not to get to that pain. So, okay, I'm
Exactly.
with you. Okay,
Exactly.
so let's get to the exile, the painful part.
And you can imagine also, you know, when we throw pharmaceuticals into the mix as well.
Well, then that numbs the whole thing up if you're taking pharmaceuticals. But if someone's able to go through it like you're going through it, to dissect the levels, and we can get to the exile, the place of that lost child. Go into that a little further, explain it.
And so that's one of the most sacred parts of the journey. And I think most practitioners worth their salt are seeking out that contact.
But what does it look like? What does the exile actually look like? How do we know when we found it?
It looks like Gollum.
Well, that doesn't do anything for me. What does it look like inside an individual?
That's not true. That's if I give you a more technical, one of the psychologists who I really appreciate is Yoram Kaufman, and he was someone who really was helping to pioneer the objective psyche, right? Which is to say that this, we've come a long way where we try to ask people what they think about images. Like, what do you think? What does it feel? And we've kind of drifted in psychology away from the fact that some symbols are objective and they have a meaning, right? And to bring in the subjective is actually just to filter what you think through your own complexes and to mix things up even further. And the reason I say this is because he really had a very belittling view of personal development, because he said it completely lacked the imaginal. So when you ask me a question of what does that look like, I can give you a technical definition of an exile that completely lacks the imaginal, that doesn't help anybody. It's overly technical.
What does help me is to tell me what it looks like in you, or what one of the exiles looked like in you, if you don't mind sharing.
Well, I want to say, I can do that too, but I will also say to you that to say Gollum is a very, very good response to that answer. Because
but
if you look at
mean
Gollum,
anything to me, I don't even know what, if I don't even know what that word means.
So you know Gollum from the Lord of the Rings?
I not really, no.
Okay.
I avoided that series.
That's where it falls down, because Gollum essentially is this, at first glance, sad, broken, deranged, filthy, just pathetic individual.
Okay.
Well, that's what the exile looks like. That's what the exile
does it look like for you, if you don't mind sharing something personal?
It feels exactly like that. It feels like a part of me that is utterly hopeless and helpless, and that is convinced of its own uselessness, of its own irredeemability. Irredeemability. That is what it is. It's the absolute, complete absence of self-worth and value. Okay,
I'm with you. I'm with you on that.
Could I go any further?
No, I got you.
And that
being.
But let me tie it one more back, right? That's the part of all of us that we're playing whack-a-mole with.
Whack-a-mole?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
We need to really upgrade your cultural references, Alan.
I know. I'm like living in another century.
Yeah.
Whack-a-mole is
what? Never played whack-a-mole?
Not with Gollum, I haven't, but no.
So there will be individuals, I would imagine, out there who would know.
I'm sure most of them. But if you can make it a little clearer without using...
Well, it's an encapsulation, It's an encapsulation that it's a right-brained, full system download when you say. So whack-a-mole is an old video game that used to play where there are 20 holes in front of you and you've got this big mallet. And these moles will automatically come up, and the aim of the game, and it's very interesting because it's archetypal, as with most games, most movies, most films, these are emanations of psyche, and whack-a-mole is no exception. In fact, it's a beautiful, painful example of what we do, which is that these moles come up, and the object of the game is that you have to whack them as they come up. And of course, what happens is that the faster you get, the better you get at it, the more the game raises these moles so quickly so that eventually you get to a point where you can't, and then you lose, and then you have to put another quarter in.
I see. So the exile in us is where the ugly parts of us, the horrible, the sulking, the self-pitying, the awful parts that we don't want to look like. I mean, that's what the wound is. The wound is touching those places.
Right, exactly. And they're constantly coming up, and we're
Okay.
constantly avoiding them because we have these, 4, 5, 6 really sophisticated defense mechanisms preventing us from making contact with that part of ourselves. And like I said, any really true therapeutic practice is essentially, first and foremost, accessing these exiles, going through this labyrinth, right? The Minotaur would probably be the fireman at the end. The Minotaur is that part of you that is actually saying, I'm gonna, I'll kill you, or this will kill you if you do this. This is why so many of us are so terrified of entering into it.
Wait, so if you really touch the exile, it feels like that's totally consuming.
If you touch your own irredeemability,
right?
I mean, there's a part of your conscious mind, there's a part of your defense mechanism that says, don't do that because you're going to have a psychotic break for the next month and a half. Why would you do that?
But you say do it anyway. What do you say then? How do you get to it?
What I say is understand the map, start normalizing the process, and then find
what does that mean, normalizing the process?
Normalizing the somatic descent. We want to make this whole process of going into the heroic journey into the underworld to connect with the exile something as normal as going down into the basement in a Manhattan apartment and doing our laundry.
Right. So you're saying,
I mean, can you imagine what would happen if all of Manhattan, which psychologically is kind of still what's happening, if most of Manhattan all had washers and dryers in their basement, but everyone was afraid to go down there? Mm-hmm. What would happen? Houses would be just overflowing with dirty clothes, and you'd constantly be buying new clothes.
It looks like, no, anyway. So, okay, so we manage the things in the way, and we see that ugly part of ourselves, the part that's in pain, and which is not easy. I'm summing it up as it's sure. Like easy, but it's
not that hard, to be honest.
It's not.
I mean, the bigger the trauma, the harder it is. But really, the way I see it is, look, if you go down to the basement, haul your, I used to live in Manhattan, not too far from you, and I used to go down in the basement and I would bring like a suitcase of dirty laundry, and it was a hassle and I didn't like it, but eventually it was done.
Right. But it doesn't work if someone else points out that ugly parts of us, because that actually amplifies the wound, unless it's your therapist, maybe, I guess, or
yeah,
something.
Absolutely. It's a very sacred journey. And that's another thing that like pretty much most people are doing in some way, shape, or form, I think. It's like that old joke I used to say when you're at a cocktail party. It's like, just wait for the person that you're randomly meeting to tell you how it is. And this used to be a classic thing, especially in New York. You just hang out with people and you start talking. At some point, usually, someone will ever so slightly put themselves above you. That's a very subtle projection of their own trauma and an abuse, and it's absolutely what we shouldn't do. And basically, it's kind of what you're talking about. Eventually, we're going there. Whether they're pointing something out in you, you don't know how this works. I'll tell you how it is. It's the absolute tail end of not understanding how to do this process, which really should be a very sacred journey of like, hey, hi, we're both broken. What are you working with? What am I working with? And if you're going to somatically descend, the correct place for me is in a supportive role. I need to take shotgun, so to speak. Right. I'm over here. I follow. I don't lead. I can support, I can question, but I support you to do that. And I support you like the way that you need, and whatever proximity to that is. And that's a healthy therapy.
Would you support me in saying, like, okay, you find the ugliness, you find the uncomfortable. Would you support me by saying, yes, look at your ugliness? Or would you support me in saying, well, it's not that ugly, or whatever that means? How do you
I would say when you're ready, I'm here for you to go down there, and I'll support you in the way that you need. And if I'm not supporting you correctly, you tell me what you need. And when you're ready, we'll go.
So I like the idea you're saying it's a sacred journey. Each of these wounds, each of these exiles that we've departed from our own conscious psyche is a sacred journey to one part of our history that created pain that we've lived with
Yeah.
since we were 2 years old, or one, or maybe past lifetime, whatever. But anyway, okay,
Yeah.
so we're there. We're there with the exile, whatever part of us that feels incomplete. So we run after relationships here and there to complete us. And
Well, you touched upon something interesting that maybe I think you did. It was,
yeah,
you know, your generation was one of the last that did a lot of this work kind of with the Zen stick. You know, real bang on the head. You know, it's like Paul Lowe, God love him, but he was brutal. You know, other people like Andrew Cohen, you know, they would just kind of sit there, and if you fell asleep during meditation, the rule was you slap the person in the face.
right. So you're saying you don't
And
poke
that's
your
over.
finger in the wound, you gently like put ointment on it. So the old way was to say, yep, you got that wound right there. I'm going to put my finger just so you feel it more. And the new way, what you're sort of representing is like, okay, we're both looking at the wound. It's awful, it's oozing, but let's see what we can do to work with it.
What we've discovered from, you know, the times of Werner Eckhart's S training, where it's like, if you got to go to the bathroom, you're just gonna have to piss yourself because you ain't leaving this room, right? It may have been that that whole period of time, perhaps just culturally, we were so blockaded to our wounds that the door had to be kicked down, but that
Right.
is no longer the case. And we can talk about how that development has taken place. But at this point, what we've now realized is that the fastest way for you to do it is for me to support you at your pace. That's the fastest.
I think that's an evolution. I thank you so much for pointing out that piece, because I think you're absolutely right. There's been an evolution to work, and part of this whole work comes out of a compassionate way of being with someone, as opposed to like the psychoanalysts or whatever, the Zen teacher, or whatever it has.
Yeah, you should have been a fly on the wall when I was doing my transpersonal psychotherapy with Devagit.
Yes, Devaki was part of the old school, wasn't he?
He
He
would
not
just,
only slap you, he kicked you,
he
just to
would
make sure.
roar. If you blinked in a session, get the fuck out. But I will say, it was brilliant, and there was genius there.
For a
And
while, unless it enforces the wound, gives you another wound that puts in the place of the other wound, which I think is what some of that old therapy did. It replaced the wounds.
What it does is it reinforces the strength of the fireman, for example.
Right.
It reinforces all the bodyguards that are protecting your exiles, your golems. They start to talk to each other, and they say, this isn't sensitive enough for us to actually allow you to go down to the Holy of Holies.
That's right. So
it's steel boots in the unconscious, and you need, made to measure velvet slippers. And until you have those, we may give you the illusion that you're getting what you need just to get through the process, but we won't actually give you access to that.
That's
and the
right.
energy underneath the exile will not be liberated.
Right. And the more wounded you are, the more your firemen are up in arms, ready to stop anyone from entering that sacred place. And you're right, it is a sacred place. It's a beautiful way of putting it. I'm just, feeling that, because it's our soul's journey to the energetic heart that we always have been, but we've forgotten that because of the trials and tribulations of existence.
Yeah, and I think what you probably supported me to realize in our last session around, what's the purpose of this? Because I'm always gaining more and more granular understanding, and I love your question, because you just say, what is the purpose? And maybe I'll I said love in the last one, and you were like, yeah, that means nothing these days. That's on the back of a Wheaties packet. It's like, come on. And I agree in one regard, and I love that, but what I realize is that I do think that's a coming wave of the evidence of actual, true, let's say, agape love. To what degree have we been able to support each other to rescue our exiles? And
Well,
you
you're
could even be,
supporting me now by laying out the map.
yeah.
So, okay.
But I mean, you see what I'm saying though? I mean, like as an actual thing in terms of, let's say, friendship, you know, or marriage or whatever it is, business relationships. It's like, you know, the old Zen masters, they used to cross each other on the path. And, you know, one of these, you know, 70-year-old guys would turn to the other and be like, how old are you? And he'd say, I'm 8. How old are you? I'm 12. And what they were really saying was, how old are you since you awakened? You know, it's been 12 years since I awakened, you know? And maybe this would be another way that we could actually cross each other on the journey and say, like, how old are we? Which would mean how many times have we supported each other to go to our own wounds and come back, come back.
So let's go to the wound. Okay, we're in the wound. Then I think that I did I tell you the story where I'm talking to my mother on the phone and she's going on and on complaining about this and this and I somehow get nothing I could ever do will help this person. And I got that and I stayed with that pain and something shifted because, you know, 50 whatever years of dealing with this situation, trying to make it better. And then the realization, nothing I can say, because I've said everything, I mean, at least I think I have, could help this person the way that I would like. I mean, other things might help, but what? So I sat with that wound and I just sat with that realization because it came to me, wow, nothing I can say. There's nothing I can say. And then, wow, how does that feel? And I felt it. And then something lifted. There was a energetic, if you want to say, clearing. But I had to, wasn't pleasant to feel. But that was freeing for me. Now I don't have to go around helping everyone who's a projection of my mother. I mean, if they want help, of course, but not through this unconscious way of thinking, well, I couldn't help that person. Maybe I can help this person. So that I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And you know, I think so many of us have that, the idea that we have not been able to help our parents, save our parents, do whatever.
Save them. Yes, it's the saving thing. So you go about saving everyone else, but it's actually never enough because you never say it's projection.
Right. That's that second layer, right?
Yes.
And so if I was to follow you on this, so I would say there are a few things I can bring to the table with that. And obviously I think, like, I just love your description of that for starters, Alan. You know, it's like, as we talk about this, we are in that sacred place. And anyone who's listening has to know, the minute someone references something like this, you have to slow down because we're already there. And in fact, if we don't notice that, we also become complicit in the lack of acknowledgement of that child that feels unworthy.
Can I just ask you one more thing? Maybe in the next Zoom next week, we can invite some people into the Zoom room. It's up to you to just share that place if they want to.
Sure, we could explore it, see if it goes. I mean, maybe
next
we
week.
could also start with questions or something like that. But here's something that I would say.
Yes.
You're touching upon something that I kind of want to address, because this is already kind of bleeding over into our next session, which is rearranging all of those family dynamics in a healthy way. Because what you're talking to is what I experienced working for years in chronic illness, which is this debt that has not been paid that keeps getting passed on to the children. So for example, and there are 2 or 3 things that I would like to share with you about this, right?
Okay.
Number one is, was it ever really your debt? And
what do you mean? What you have to explain that by debt? You have to be really clear.
So this would be a family constellation phenomenon, right? Under what circumstances does the child suddenly become the savior of the mother or the father, right? Under what circumstances does the baby you're the child, right? You're the baby. And I don't say that disparagingly. I say that with courtesy and with respect, right? And somehow, in some distorted way, the baby has to somehow be the savior of the maker. That's an inversion.
Yes, that's the drama of the gifted child. That's Alice Miller. That's
whose responsibility was it actually to care for the mother in that way?
well, Alice Miller says that's where the whole thing goes wrong. It's the responsibility of the mother to care for the child, and if the child's needs are not met,
And whose
then they have
responsibility is
to
it to
meet
care
their
for the mother?
needs by meeting someone else's needs, to make it a little complex.
Yeah, and whose responsibility is it to care for the mother?
Well, whose responsibility is it to care for the mother? The
Husband.
father, the
And
husband.
the mother.
And if the
Her
husband,
mother. Her husband and her father and her mother.
and if the husband, the father, is not there to care for the mother, and it becomes the child's place to care for the mother, then the father is exiled and the child is trapped and the mother perpetuates it. Is this?
And so what you have is, you have the healing energy of life constantly trying to run upstream when it
What does
can't.
that mean exactly?
Well,
Upstream.
the healing energy of life should be the mother and the father care for the child. The child has a child, cares for that child. That child has another child, and the healing love goes down through the generations. Goes down through the generations. That's how life would perpetuate. What has happened is we are at a pathological place where we have tried to push the energy upstream, and it can't go upstream. It can go when there's an abundance, right? It doesn't mean we're all supposed to abandon our parents, right? There should be an abundance there, which then circles back. But what we have here is that no one is getting enough, and everyone is feeling guilty and trying to go back. So the healing flow, the river of life is trying to reverse course.
Okay.
And here what I would say, so once again, this is all intellectual. We're not going to necessarily walk through this, right? We can maybe explore this next time, because I've got a whole process that one of the processes that we go through is we actually identify all of the dynamics in each of our families in which this is taking place. So we see which way are the energetics moving, and then we have to reverse many of them.
Well, we could do that. Someone would like to come on to, how do I connect on Zoom with you guys? Let's hold that for next week, okay?
Sure.
Because we are almost kind of today in a way, but okay. So, well, I mean, you have more to give, right? I mean, this is we're not finished with this session. So
I would just say one last piece about that, which is, you can see that child that you so kindly kind of brought to all of us, right? This is a representation of all of us. It connects to all of us in one way or another. So your voicing of your child actually activates all of our children. Okay. That's why we begin with the energetic heart and awareness, which is the practice that you did, right? So the minute you find yourself with the child, which we have found, session 2, right? We're in the underworld, and we are with the abandoned. We are with the exile. So imagine what would happen if you were with the exile and you didn't have the energetic heart online, and you didn't have awareness online. You would find yourself with the person who most needs your care, and you would be empty-handed.
Oh, so if I said to myself, wow, you did it again, you couldn't meet that person's needs, you're just no good, that's missing the energetic heart. If I say, drop into here and what they call self-empathy, give myself a little compassion, say, which is what I did really for the first time, because for some reason I was able to do it, because it was so extreme maybe. The energetic heart, you're saying, allows a place of compassion to look at the exile and say, it's okay, it's okay. Is that
the exile only really responds to the energetic heart. The exile, right, our golem, they don't care what we say. They don't care what we think. They care what we do, but that's afterwards. That's level 2, right? But level 1 is they just want us to hold them. And they want to feel our love for the part of ourselves that is the least loving.
Well,
And that's a
they want to be held in their pain. It's like a part of the avoidance behavior, the alcoholism, all that was, or even the need to help other people was because people weren't able to just sit with that place in a way of helplessness and what would you call it? Aggravation, perhaps, that and sit.
What was his need, do you think? What was his need that had not been met? And through
My
that
child's
experience,
need, that was to get love. It's always a need for love. Because, and this is what Alice Miller says, because the child's needs are not met to receive the love that is nurturing, they find a way through their own behaviors
yes,
feel loved. And one way to feel loved is to meet another person's needs.
right. So this is the last piece I will maybe say about this, then we can kind of wind it up. But one of the things that started to work very well for me, working with chronic illness individuals who experience similar dynamics in the family, because eventually what happens is like, okay, the energetic heart is online. You're now giving that to your inner child, your exile. That's good. And I worked that angle for a long time. But what I noticed was there was always still that yearning for the idealized mother. What I found was that if the biological mother, the earthly mother, was never able to do it, what we could do, which is a whole other energetic practice and muscle to build, we actually connect to the soul of the mother.
Oh.
You actually identify a part of her that you can call in that is able to be there for you in the way that she never could, that actually understands what has happened, that actually even feels remorse.
Mm-hmm.
And over the years, I found that that's something that we can actually do.
Yeah, but before we do that, we don't want to make that a fantasy projection either.
No.
We want to go there before we felt the wound. If we say, oh yeah, my mother is like this ideal, and then I'm talking to the source, and then it's an avoidance. It could be, and probably is a lot of times, avoidance.
It becomes a fantasy projection. And to be honest, I've never encountered it as a fantasy projection. But I think that's a great point. But I think the only way that it could is if it remains intellectual. Because this would never work. I mean, what I just presented would never work. And it has worked for years in my own practice. It would never work if people didn't actually feel something happen. And sometimes people feel it immediately. Sometimes they actually have to connect to it. And that's a whole process in itself that we can go into. But where I started to realize that something was actually possible is when it became a healing, cathartic intervention filled with tears and reconciliation on a different plane. Why? Well, if the earthly plane is unreconcilable, well, you can either just live your life and be stuck with that, and we know where that leads. And once again, this is why this is all really an energetic process. We can connect to that energetic place. We can find her. And there's more to say about that. You don't just call some random imaginal idea of your mother in and start to have a conversation. Like, try to do that, and you'll hit a lot of landmines too. There's a process to it.
Okay.
And we can explore that together.
Well, could you take us through that process maybe next week?
Let's do it. Let's explore it.
Should we do it now, or should we?
I think it would be nice for people to, if they're going to go through it with us, I would say, give it the respect it requires.
Okay.
Be diligent. Work the energetic heart first. Because once again, this is what I say to people. Listen, if we're going to go to the underworld together and you're going to be part of our team of Argonauts, right? Have a sword, man. Have a shield. Like, don't just come in your freaking sweatpants.
Okay.
Like, get prepared.
Okay.
You want to go to the underworld, get prepared. Have your energetic heart online. Do the practice 2-3 times a day. Feel energy here. If you can actually give yourself love, where there are no stakes and there are no exiles in sight. That's how you train for this.
Oh, is that the practice? Because you haven't gone through that really before. The practice is to just feel the energetic heart. Is that what we did do something a little bit before?
We did. We basically said, start with your heartbeat and your biological heart.
Right.
Bring it to the energetic heart. Choose a word. Choose a word.
A word like what?
A word that gives you strength when you're on your knees.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Like
Yeah,
hope, love,
like
trust,
resilience.
the baby Jesus, Will Ferrell, you know?
Okay. Okay. So you go to the energetic heart, you feel it, and then you give yourself the word that will give you the power.
And you speak that word like, yeah, you speak it like a mantra, and that's, you're actually doing internal energetic heart reps. Because
Okay.
we need you to have that skill online.
Okay.
Because when you meet the energetic child, you can either have some healing balm in your hands, or you can meet them empty-handed. Don't do that. It happens all the time. We do it all the time. Don't meet your inner child empty-handed. If we're going to go on a journey to meet them, have something in your hand.
Okay. So this is what you want people watching to do for next week. Go into a little energetic heart meditation, feel it, and then maybe we'll invite some people into the Zoom room, and maybe you could work with them or not. I mean, we'll just see how that goes.
Well, here's another thing. I'll tell you what, it's interesting. You're talking about such interesting things. I've also noticed, as you will know full well, we've had a long history of doing work in public.
Right.
A lot of teachers have gotten famous off of the backs of doing work with people in public.
Right.
I don't think we're going to continue with that because it's voyeuristic.
And it's not sacred either.
Not sacred.
So
what's actually often happening is that we would be using people. We would be using their sacred moment to elevate our own status as healers.
So you're just giving us the map, but not the territory. We have to travel our own terrain ourselves, but at least we have a map, I think is what you're saying. The map.
And I would invite people to consider the way that we do this is we find someone who we can trust and we go on the journey. And I think that's where we're going. We're going back to the village where you're gonna find your person. But if anyone's really interested, join the course that we're going to be doing. We're going to be launching this thing.
How do we find the course? I'm just going to type that into the chat. What is the website?
Yeah, people can sign up for the wait list.
Okay,
and
but
going through a process like this in private.
Okay, but what is the website?
There it is. I sent it to you.
I'm just going to put it in the chat, but you sent it.
It's on all these videos. You've been very kind, Alan, to kind of connect everyone to these videos, most of them to the wait list.
No, for me, I'm not doing it to be kind. Actually, I have to tell you, I'm doing it because you're giving me a map to my own terrain. You know, I'm doing it for myself, I have to say. You know, I'm doing it for here. I just put it into the chat room, and I'll put it in the comment section as well. So, all right.
What we're going to be doing there is we're going to be doing it in private. There will be other people on the call, but it's not going to be public. It's not going to be advertising. It's going to be a sacred process, and people are going to be supported in the ways that they need. So we will do it together anonymously. And if people need additional support, that will be on hand.
Okay, great. But anyway, for people following this dialogue, you can tune in next Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for the next map of the journey into consciousness and awakening and freedom. In a way, it's freedom. I mean, in a way, it's you're mapping the road to self-care, freedom, and eventually awakening.
Well, we need it. That's the goal, and it will no doubt be amended by many others long after me. And so this is, I'm simply offering what I believe is a very good current next step. We're kind of surfing the frothy edge of personal and spiritual development here. And this is what I think is is really as cutting edge as it gets and as comprehensive as it gets in terms of the down and dirty truth and scaffolding of what's really inside of us.
Okay. I mean, I think you're doing a great job. Of course, I have to say, you're not intellectual because you've actually done this journey with yourself. So you're really giving us the steps in your own psyche. This is one way to do it. And it wouldn't have any context unless it had, you know, we see the footprints of people who've gone before us and say, okay, maybe this is a way through the underworld. But maybe Jung or Freud or people had to hack their way through with the help of Greek myths in order to actually create the path to the wounded self.
Yeah.
So thanks for picking up the journey. You're widening the path. I'm not saying you should make it into a highway, but you're making the path to the self a little more accessible.
Well, knowing capitalism, it will at some point be co-opted into the consumeristic market, and there'll be a highway and a toll and gift shops, and
that's all a distraction. I think the wilderness will stay wild.
I hope so. Long live wilderness.
There is no ultimate path to the self except the one we each find.
Oh, beautiful.
No, but that's
it, Alan. I love that.
I mean, there are maps other people have taken, but each road, it's unique. Yeah. Someone asked you, I think we've talked about the virus before, but of course, the virus is an externalization of the wounds each of us have in a way, or how you deal with it is how you deal with everything.
Yeah, there's so much to be said about the virus, and there are so many things out there, but if anyone's interested, you can check. I said a little thing about it. Here it is. It's on that. I was approaching it from an archetypal standpoint.
Okay.
So if anyone's interested just in some of the deep archetypal imagery of the virus,
okay,
this is a video that I just did not long ago, and I kind of honed it down to 4 particular symbols. One is plague, one is homecoming, one is hand washing, and the other is crown, the corona.
Okay.
And so I just gave an analysis of that, but more or less what I was saying in the end was, this is a homecoming. That's why we've all been sent to our rooms. We're invited to actually clean up our house, put our house in order, and this is what this is all about.
Okay. All right, great. No, it is. And this is why I'm very happy to take this time with you on these weekly calls to be part of the housekeeping.
I love it. Thank you so much. Always a joy. I love being with you.
Thank you. I think I really appreciate your vulnerability too, and your persistence, because in a way, all we have is our own psyche to work with. That's all we're ever working with.
Right.
You know, like the woman who goes to a meditation. I'll just tell you something. Elizabeth Gilbert, who I really love, she goes to this meditation course, you know, before all this, I mean, maybe a couple of years ago, and she hates it. She can't stand it. She has to leave. She says to the master, I got to get out of here. I'm a people person. I need to be with people. I'm paraphrasing all this. And the master says, okay, if you want to leave, leave. And she goes, really? I can just leave? And he goes, yeah, but maybe you want to talk to the headmaster. And so she goes talk to the headmaster, and she says, I hate it here. I got to get out. Please, is it okay? I gotta go. And the master says, okay, go. And she goes, really? And is there something you're not saying? And he looks at her and he says, there's nowhere to go.
Yeah, beautiful.
You gotta take yourself with you, basically. And unless we have the map to our own psyche, we're going to keep looking for distractions in the world and never drop into a real spiritual presence. We are.
Yeah.
We are.
That was beautiful, Alan. Yeah. There's no escape.
there's no escape. Actually, Elizabeth Gilbert tells it about someone else, but I paraphrased the whole thing. But anyway, there is no escape until you have the map.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, so much fun, Alan. All right, I'll see you next week. Great talking with you.
3 p.m. Join us here on
Everyone.
YouTube.
Thanks for checking in.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks, Zachary.